Elena stood by the tall glass windows of the mansion, one hand resting on her 7-month belly, watching the perfectly trimmed garden sway under the afternoon breeze. Anyone who looked at her life from the outside saw perfection: a massive villa with marble floors, a garage packed with expensive cars, luxurious trips posted on social media, and a husband whose name opened doors everywhere. Her friends envied her constantly, whispering about how lucky she was to have married a millionaire like Victor. They imagined fairy tale romance, breakfasts in bed, and a man who adored her beyond measure. But inside, deep beneath the polished exterior, Elena felt something cold creeping into her life day by day. Victor treated her more like a display piece than a partner. He rarely touched her belly, never asked how she felt, and acted irritated whenever she mentioned the baby kicking. When she tried to share her emotions, he brushed her off with a dismissive wave, saying she was overreacting because of hormones. He loved showing her off at events, making her stand beside him in expensive gowns so people could admire what he owned. But the moment they returned home, the warmth disappeared, replaced with silence and distance. Elena tried convincing herself that the stress of work was making Victor act this way. She hoped their baby would soften him, bring them closer, make him gentler. She imagined him holding their child, smiling, becoming the man she once fell in love with. Yet every night she went to bed feeling more alone, more unsure, more afraid of the future. She didn't recognize the man Victor was becoming, and deep inside, she feared he was only getting colder. It started with small things, moments Elena dismissed at first. Victor snapping because his dinner wasn't warm enough. Victor complaining she walked too slowly, forgetting she carried the weight of another life inside her. Victor rolling his eyes whenever she asked for even the smallest bit of emotional support. But soon, those small irritations grew sharper. His voice became louder, his temper quicker, and Elena learned to move silently around the house, afraid of triggering another outburst. He criticized everything she did. If she dropped something, he called her clumsy. If she needed help standing, he sighed dramatically, as though her pregnancy was an inconvenience rather than a shared blessing. Sometimes she cried quietly in the bathroom, covering her mouth so he wouldn't hear. She used to think love meant patience, but now she wondered if she was trapped in a life that cared nothing for her heart or her safety. Her doctor noticed the tension immediately. During one of her checkups, the doctor gently asked if she was under stress, mentioning her blood pressure and tightness in her shoulders. Elena forced a smile, pretending everything was fine. She didn't tell anyone the truth because she didn't know where she could go. Victor controlled everything: the money, the house, the car keys. Leaving felt impossible. At night, when Victor slammed cabinet doors or stormed around the house, Elena would place her hands over her belly and whisper to her unborn child, promising protection she wasn't sure she could give. She wished someone would see past the glamorous photos, past the expensive clothes, past the mansion walls, and realize she was hurting. But no one knew. No one suspected. Behind those closed doors, Elena lived in rising fear, hoping Victor wouldn't get worse. But deep inside, she knew he would. Victor's obsession with power seemed to grow with every business deal he closed and every headline that mentioned his name. He thrived on attention, soaking in admiration wherever he went, and recently, he'd begun attending events almost every night. Elena often accompanied him because he insisted she made him look stable, but once they arrived, he acted as though she didn't exist. Groups of younger models flocked to him, drawn by his money and confidence, and Victor encouraged it. He flirted openly, laughing loudly, placing casual hands on their backs, whispering things Elena couldn't hear but could feel deep in her chest. She stood quietly at his side, trying to smile, trying not to break. Whenever Elena gently asked him to stop embarrassing her, he scoffed, saying she should be grateful he chose her when he had so many options. His words sliced through her, and he delivered them so smoothly that others laughed, thinking he was joking. But Elena knew he meant every word. Victor fed on dominance, on reminding her she was replaceable while he was powerful, wealthy, and adored. As weeks passed, Victor's drinking escalated. He arrived home late, reeking of alcohol and ego. The liquor sharpened his anger, loosening his tongue until every sentence became a weapon. Elena learned to stay quiet, to avoid arguing, to protect her baby from the storms he brought inside. She felt her heart shrinking, her confidence fading. The man she married, once charming, protective, full of promises, had become a stranger who cared more about his rising status than his growing family. Victor's power was his world, and he didn't care who he crushed to keep it intact, not even Elena or the child they were supposed to welcome together. One evening, out of nowhere, Victor announced he was taking Elena to an upscale restaurant downtown. His sudden gesture confused her, but she hoped maybe, just maybe, he wanted to make things right. As they drove through the city lights, she kept glancing at him, trying to read his mood. Victor seemed calm, almost cheerful, the version he showed the world, polished, confident, attentive. Elena held onto that tiny spark of hope, praying he wouldn't explode tonight. When they entered the restaurant, Victor slipped easily into his charming persona, greeting the staff like they were old friends. Elena walked beside him, uneasy, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She could tell the smiles he offered her were fake, but at least the public atmosphere kept him controlled. Their waiter, Adam, approached the table with a warm, professional smile. He was tall, with steady eyes that noticed everything without staring. As he placed their menus down, he subtly observed Elena, the way she shifted uncomfortably, the faint redness in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. Adam had spent years in MMA before a back injury forced him to step away, and that training had made him incredibly intuitive. He could read people like open books, especially those in distress. Throughout the evening, Adam maintained a calm attentiveness. He noticed Victor's dismissive tone, the sharpness in his voice, the way Elena flinched at small comments. Adam's instincts whispered that something was wrong. Meanwhile, Elena tried her best to stay composed, reminding herself to breathe, telling herself she just needed to get through dinner. She prayed Victor would behave in public as he pretended to. She didn't know that tonight, her world would shatter, and Adam's quiet watchfulness would soon become her saving grace. Elena eased herself into the chair, moving slowly because her back ached and her belly felt heavier than usual. Victor sighed loudly, rolling his eyes as though her discomfort was an inconvenience designed specifically to annoy him. "God, Elena, could you be any slower?" he muttered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. A couple glanced over, and Elena's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Victor wasn't done. As she adjusted her position, trying to find a comfortable angle, he smirked and said, "Maybe if you hadn't gained so much weight, sitting down wouldn't feel like a construction project." His voice carried across the restaurant, slicing through her already fragile heart. Adam approached at that moment with water glasses, immediately sensing the shift in energy at the table. He placed the glasses gently, offering Elena a soft, understanding look before turning to Victor with professional composure. "If you need anything to make your experience more comfortable, please let me know," he said calmly, directing the comment toward Elena without being obvious. Victor stiffened instantly, annoyed that someone would acknowledge her needs. "What she needs is to stop acting like she's sick," Victor snapped, glaring at Adam as though daring him to respond. Adam kept his voice polite and steady. "Pregnancy can make sitting uncomfortable, sir. I'm happy to assist with anything she requires." The respectful tone only irritated Victor further, making him feel challenged in a room where he expected absolute dominance. Elena wished she could disappear. She whispered a small thank you to Adam, who nodded subtly, letting her know she wasn't invisible. Victor's irritation simmered, his control slipping as he felt attention drifting away from him. Adam stayed close enough to watch, knowing instinctively that the tension at this table was far from ordinary, and far from safe. As the minutes passed, Victor's irritation grew sharper, fueled by the whispered attention from nearby diners who had already witnessed his earlier remarks. He hated being watched unless he was the center of admiration, and tonight, he felt judged. To regain control, he turned his frustration toward Elena, determined to remind everyone, and her, of his superiority. "You really should have stayed home," he said loudly, waving his hand dismissively. "Look at you. You're tired, swollen, and honestly ruining my evening." A few diners gasped quietly. Elena lowered her eyes, trying to hide the sting in them, her fingers trembling around the edge of the napkin. She whispered, "Victor, please don't," but he cut her off with a cold laugh. "Don't what?" "Don't tell the truth," he sneered. "You're supposed to represent me, Elena. And right now, you look like you can't handle even being out in public." His voice echoed through the restaurant, commanding unwanted attention. A woman at a nearby table shook her head in disbelief, murmuring to her partner. Adam stood by the service station, observing every detail. His jaw tightened, the muscles in his arms flexing with restrained anger. He had seen abusive behavior before, but something about this situation, the vulnerability of the pregnant woman, the arrogance of the man hurting her, struck a deeper nerve. He forced himself to remain professional, knowing stepping in too soon could escalate things dangerously. Elena blinked back tears, her throat tight as she tried to keep her composure. She wasn't weak, but the emotional weight, combined with pregnancy, made her feel like she was sinking. Victor leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the humiliation he'd inflicted, unaware that people around him were no longer impressed by his wealth but disgusted by his cruelty. And Adam knew this wasn't over. Victor's anger was reaching a dangerous edge, and he was preparing himself for whatever might come next. Victor's face twisted with a fury that came out of nowhere, though Elena had seen hints of it building all evening. The alcohol he'd been drinking only added fuel to the fire, sharpening his anger into something dangerous. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at Elena as if her very existence offended him. She tried to look away, hoping to defuse the situation, but Victor snapped, completely and violently. In one swift, brutal motion, he grabbed a fistful of her hair. Elena gasped, her breath caught in her throat as pain shot through her scalp. Before she could even process what was happening, he slammed her pregnant head down onto the table. The sound echoed sharply, followed by the clattering of silverware and the shattering of a glass. Diners screamed, chairs scraped back, and a sudden, horrified silence swept the room before chaos erupted. Elena cried out, her hands instinctively flying to her belly. The shock, the pain, the terror, it all hit her at once. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to protect her unborn child, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Please, please stop." Victor, breathing hard, looked ready to strike again. But someone else had already moved. Adam, who had been a few steps away carrying a tray of drinks, dropped it instantly. Glasses crashed to the floor, liquid splashing across his shoes, but he didn't care. His instincts kicked in faster than thought. His posture changed, his eyes sharpened, and every bit of training he'd ever had surged through him like electricity. The entire restaurant seemed to shift into slow motion as he sprinted toward the table. Diners froze, all eyes locked on the horrifying scene. Elena, trembling and in pain, clutched her stomach, terrified for her baby. Victor towered over her, still seething, his body tense with violent energy. But Adam was already closing the distance, ready to intervene with every ounce of strength he had left. The moment was seconds away from exploding into something even worse, until Adam arrived. Adam reached the table just as Victor raised his hand again, ready to strike. His voice was calm but firm, held together by a deadly edge. "Step away from her. Now." It wasn't a request. It was a warning. Victor spun around, startled that someone dared interrupt him. He was taller, bulkier, and fueled by alcohol and entitlement. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he barked, stepping forward aggressively. The restaurant fell silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Adam didn't flinch. His stance shifted subtly, shoulders squared, feet grounded, muscles relaxed but ready. "Don't touch her again," Adam repeated, eyes locked on Victor with unblinking precision. Victor snarled, jabbing a finger at Adam's chest. "I'll do whatever I want. That's my wife. Stay out of this, waiter boy." The words dripped with arrogance, but Adam remained unmoved. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't uncertain. He wasn't backing down. Victor threw the first punch, wild, sloppy, driven by ego rather than skill. Adam saw it coming before Victor's arm even lifted. He shifted his weight, sidestepping with smooth precision. Victor stumbled forward from the missed swing, surprised and embarrassed. He turned again, angrier than before. "You want to fight me?" he growled. Adam didn't answer. He didn't need to. Victor lunged, throwing another messy punch. This time, Adam moved with lightning speed. He ducked, pivoted, and with a single controlled strike, delivered a powerful blow to Victor's jaw, perfectly placed, perfectly timed. The sound was sharp, final. Victor's body went limp mid-motion. He collapsed backward, crashing onto the floor with a heavy thud. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. A woman near the bar covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Then, unexpectedly, applause broke out. Soft at first, then stronger, building into a wave of relief and gratitude. Adam stood over Victor's unconscious body, breathing steadily, his expression calm and focused, not triumphant, just resolute. He immediately turned toward Elena, kneeling beside her as she trembled, clutching her belly. "You're safe now," he said quietly. And for the first time that night, she truly believed it. The moment Victor hit the ground, the restaurant erupted into frantic movement. Chairs scraped, people rushed forward, and several staff members hurried to Elena's side. She was shaking violently, one hand gripping her belly as though holding her child in place, the other pressed against the table for support. Adam stayed beside her, his voice steady as he checked her breathing, her pulse, her awareness. "Elena, look at me. Can you hear me?" She nodded weakly, tears streaming down her cheeks. A manager quickly guided her toward a quieter corner, away from the shattered glass and the unconscious man still sprawled on the floor. Other employees moved instinctively, one calling an ambulance, another contacting the police. Someone brought Elena water, someone else placed a jacket around her shoulders. Diners stood frozen, stunned by what they had witnessed. Several had their phones out, recording, capturing the attack, the knockout, the aftermath. Within minutes, people were whispering that the videos were already circulating online. Security guards stepped in, grabbing Victor's limp body and dragging him aside to prevent him from being trampled. He remained unconscious, sprawled like a fallen giant, no longer the powerful man who had terrorized his wife moments before. The sight shocked everyone, even those who had cheered when he hit the floor. Adam focused solely on Elena, helping her sit down gently. Her breathing was uneven, her eyes unfocused. "My baby." "I'm scared," she whispered, clutching her stomach. Adam squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay." Sirens grew louder outside. Paramedics stormed in with a stretcher, immediately evaluating Elena and preparing her for transport. As they lifted her, she reached for Adam's hand one last time, terrified but grateful. The violence was over, but the consequences were only beginning. The hospital lights were harsh, glowing too brightly as Elena was rushed through the emergency room. Nurses surrounded her, checking her vitals, asking questions, monitoring her baby's heartbeat. Elena lay trembling, her hands instinctively holding her belly, the memory of Victor slamming her head onto the table replaying relentlessly in her mind. Every sharp breath reminded her how close she'd come to losing the tiny life inside her. Tears flowed freely, not from physical pain, but from the overwhelming terror that had seized her heart. In the maternity trauma unit, doctors worked quickly and calmly. They placed monitors around her abdomen, watching the screen carefully. "The baby's heartbeat is stable," one doctor said gently. "But we need to keep you under observation. Stress like this can be dangerous." Elena nodded, her voice too weak to respond. She stared at the ceiling, trying to calm her shaking body, whispering silent prayers that her child stayed safe. Outside the ward, Adam sat in a stiff plastic chair, elbows on his knees, head bowed. He replayed the scene in his mind, the moment Victor grabbed her, the split second before the violence, the impact of her head on the table. His jaw clenched with guilt. He wished he had stepped in sooner. He wished he had seen it coming. Nurses walked by, some recognizing him from the viral videos already being shared online. A few thanked him quietly for helping, but Adam barely responded. All he cared about was whether Elena and her baby were okay. When a nurse finally came out, he stood immediately. "Is she all right?" he asked, voice tight. The nurse offered a soft, reassuring smile. She's stable. She's scared, but she's stable. Adam exhaled shakily, relief washing over him, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. He wasn't family, but he felt responsible. He wasn't going anywhere until he knew she was truly safe. By the next morning, Victor's name had become a national scandal. The videos from the restaurant, him yanking Elena's hair, smashing her head against the table, and then being knocked out by Adam, spread like wildfire. Every major platform had the footage trending at the top, accompanied by furious comments and hashtags calling for justice. Overnight, Victor transformed from a respected millionaire to the most hated man in the country. News channels replayed the clip relentlessly, dissecting every second of the assault. Talk shows brought in psychologists, activists, and legal experts who condemned his actions. Companies he once promoted scrambled to disconnect themselves from him. Within hours, sponsorship deals were terminated. His brand partnerships vanished. Even his closest business allies refused to answer his calls. Shareholders in his company held an emergency meeting, furious about the damage his behavior had caused. His public relations team resigned, releasing a brief statement distancing themselves from his actions. Banks reviewed their contracts. Clients walked away. Victor's empire, built on arrogance, influence, and intimidation, began to crumble in front of millions. Meanwhile, Adam became an overnight hero. Clips of him stepping in, protecting Elena, and knocking Victor unconscious were celebrated across the internet. People praised his calm courage, his precision, his willingness to act when no one else did. Messages poured in from strangers thanking him for defending a pregnant woman in danger. Strangers outside the hospital held signs supporting Elena, demanding justice. Victor's world collapsed completely, but Elena's story, and Adam's bravery, ignited a national conversation about domestic abuse. And as Victor faced the consequences he had long escaped, society made one thing clear: his power meant nothing anymore. When the hospital room finally fell silent and the last nurse left, Elena felt the weight of everything she'd been holding inside for years. She tried to stay strong, tried to breathe, but the quiet only amplified the storm inside her. Her chest tightened. Her vision blurred. The pressure of the past, the pain of the present, the fear for her baby, it all crashed down at once. And for the first time in a long time, she let it. Elena broke. Sobs tore through her, raw and uncontrollable. She cried for every insult, every moment she stayed silent, every bruise hidden behind makeup, every night spent praying Victor would change. She cried for the baby who deserved a safe world, for the woman she used to be, for the future she was terrified to face. A nurse entered quietly, drawn by the sound of Elena's trembling voice. Without asking questions, she sat beside her and gently wrapped her arms around Elena's shaking shoulders. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You and your baby are safe." Her tone was warm, steady, something Elena hadn't felt in years. Elena wiped her eyes, struggling to speak. I can't go back. I can't let him near me again." The nurse nodded, brushing a strand of hair from Elena's forehead. "You shouldn't. That man hurt you. He could have killed you or your child. You deserve peace. You deserve safety. You deserve a life where you don't have to flinch at every sound." Those words pierced Elena's heart, hitting a truth she'd long avoided. For the first time, she let herself believe it. She wasn't just leaving Victor. She was choosing life, hers, and her baby's. The legal aftermath erupts with a force Victor never expected. Within hours of the assault, police formally charge him with multiple offenses: assault causing bodily harm, endangering an unborn child, and public disturbance. The footage captured by dozens of diners makes it impossible for him to deny anything. His drunken rage, the violence, the horrifying moment he slammed Elena's pregnant head into the table, all of it is crystal clear in the recordings circulating online. Detectives visit Elena at the hospital, treating her gently as they take her statement. She trembles through parts of it, but her voice grows steadier each time she recalls how long she has lived in fear. Her lawyer arrives soon after, a sharp, composed woman who assures her that she is no longer alone. She explains that their prenuptial agreement has a hidden strength Victor never believed she would use, a clause that immediately grants her access to half of his assets if he ever commits physical abuse. Victor signed it casually years ago, confident he would always remain untouchable. Now, that arrogance becomes the very thing that ruins him. Elena signs papers for a restraining order, her hands shaking but determined. Police confirm Victor will remain in custody until his hearing. For the first time in a long time, Elena feels the smallest flicker of safety, like a door to freedom is finally opening. Outside the hospital, reporters gather, shouting questions about her condition and Victor's crimes. Elena doesn't respond, she doesn't have to. The world has seen the truth, and the law is finally on her side. All she cares about now is protecting her child and reclaiming a life she never thought she deserved. Elena wakes to the soft beeping of hospital monitors, her body weak but her mind clearer than it has been in years. The trauma still sits heavily inside her, but there is also a quiet awareness that she survived something unimaginable. When Adam knocks gently on the doorframe before entering, she is surprised. He stands awkwardly for a moment, unsure if he's intruding, but his eyes show genuine concern. He apologizes, not for protecting her, but for not realizing sooner how much danger she was in. Elena shakes her head, telling him he saved her life at the exact moment she needed someone to step in. For the first time in years, she feels like someone truly saw her pain. Adam sits in the chair beside her, keeping a respectful distance. Their connection isn't romantic, it is built on shared humanity, on the simple kindness of a stranger who refused to look away. He listens as she talks about her fears for the baby, her guilt, and the sense of failure that has lived inside her for so long. Adam tells her what the doctors told him outside: her baby is strong, a fighter, just like her. His words make her tear up, but this time the tears feel cleansing instead of hopeless. A nurse enters and smiles approvingly at the sight of Elena not being alone. The room feels warmer, safer. Later, when Adam leaves, he promises she can call him anytime, not as a hero, but as someone who cares. Elena leans back against the pillow, hands resting on her belly. For the first time in years, she isn't bracing for anger or violence. She is healing. She is supported. She is finally beginning to believe she deserves better. Victor wakes up in a holding cell with a pounding headache, a split lip, and bruises decorating his jaw. The humiliation hits him harder than the physical pain. A man like him, a self-proclaimed titan of business, reduced to a viral disgrace. The moment he realizes how widespread the videos have become, his rage explodes. He demands to speak to someone in authority, insisting that he has connections, but the officers remain indifferent. His influence, once his prized weapon, suddenly feels useless. His high-profile lawyer arrives, looking exhausted and irritated. The man drops a folder on the table and tells Victor, point blank, that the case is nearly impossible to salvage. The videos show clear intent, clear violence, and the public is already demanding justice. Victor tries to spin excuses: he was drunk, provoked, stressed, but none of it matters when the evidence is damning. When he orders the lawyer to fix it, the lawyer reminds him that no judge will ignore an attack on a pregnant woman caught on multiple cameras. Furious, Victor attempts to call Elena, imagining he can intimidate her back into silence, but the restraining order blocks all attempts. He slams the phone repeatedly, screaming that she is ruining everything. Deep inside, panic he refuses to acknowledge begins to rise. For the first time, he feels genuinely powerless. Shareholders distance themselves, his company freezes his accounts, and even his closest allies refuse to take his calls. The empire he built on fear and ego starts to crumble in real time. Victor spends the night pacing in his cell, swallowing anger that now tastes like dread. No matter how loudly he threatens or how desperately he blames others, the truth stands unshaken: he has finally lost control. The courtroom is packed, every seat filled, reporters lining the walls like vultures hungry for the final chapter of a scandal that has gripped the entire country. Elena enters with steady steps, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. She is nervous, anyone would be, but she looks stronger than she has in years. She takes her seat beside her lawyer, who gives her a reassuring nod. On the opposite side, Victor is brought in wearing a suit, but it does nothing to hide the fading bruises or the desperation in his eyes. He refuses to look at Elena at first, but when he finally does, he finds no fear in her gaze. That alone seems to unsettle him more than the charges. When the proceedings begin, Victor launches into every excuse he can think of. He blames the alcohol, claiming he was overwhelmed. He accuses Adam of provoking him. He insists the stress of his failing business pushed him to a breaking point. But the judge remains unmoved, glancing repeatedly at the screens displaying the viral footage. The images speak louder than Victor's excuses ever could. Elena testifies briefly, her voice soft but steady, describing the fear she lived with and the terror of that night. Her words strike harder than any accusation. When the judge finally delivers the verdict, the courtroom falls silent. Victor is sentenced to prison time, mandatory rehabilitation, and heavy financial penalties that further dismantle his remaining influence. He tries to protest, but the gavel slams, echoing with finality. Elena exhales shakily, a weight lifting off her chest. As Victor is escorted away, she realizes it's truly over. Justice, long delayed but finally delivered, has freed her. Elena stepped into her new apartment with a mix of relief and cautious hope. The space was modest compared to the mansion she had left behind, but it radiated warmth and safety, a sanctuary she had never truly known. The sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, and she could finally imagine a life where she wasn't constantly walking on eggshells, afraid of anger lurking around every corner. Slowly, she began unpacking, placing personal touches on every surface. The baby's room became her favorite project. She painted the walls in soft, comforting colors, gentle blues and creams, and hung little decorations, things she had once imagined in Victor's mansion but had never been allowed to do. Each choice she made, each item she placed, felt like reclaiming a piece of her life, a small but powerful assertion of her independence. Adam occasionally stopped by, always respectful of her boundaries, carrying supplies or checking if she needed anything. He didn't intrude on her space but made sure she wasn't completely alone in adjusting to this new chapter. They talked about practical matters, groceries, doctor appointments, the baby's room, but also about life in general. Adam never framed himself as a hero, only as someone who cared, offering calm reassurance in a world that had felt unsafe for far too long. Elena found comfort in his presence, knowing someone was watching over her, quietly protective without demanding anything in return. Despite the lingering trauma, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. She could finally breathe, plan, and imagine a future free from fear. The apartment was more than just a place to live, it was a foundation for a new beginning. Each evening, she would sit by the baby's room, gently adjusting decorations, smiling at her reflections, and silently promising herself and her child that they would never again live in a house that felt like a prison. Slowly, but surely, Elena allowed herself to feel hope again. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic, soft baby blankets, and the faint hum of monitors. Elena held her newborn son in her arms for the first time, tears streaming freely down her face. The relief was overwhelming. She had survived Victor's brutality, endured months of fear and tension, and now she could finally breathe, knowing her child was safe. His tiny fingers curled around hers, and every movement he made reinforced the certainty that leaving Victor had been the right choice. Each heartbeat, each soft coo, was a promise of freedom and love she could finally nurture without fear. The nurses congratulated her gently, placing a soft blanket around the baby and letting her adjust to the weight and warmth of him. Elena's tears weren't just for the birth, they were tears for the years she had spent enduring, for the terror she had survived, and for the strength it took to start over. Amidst her sobs, she whispered her hopes and dreams for him, vowing to give him a life full of security, care, and love, things she never received from Victor. Adam arrived quietly, carrying gifts wrapped in cheerful paper and a bouquet of flowers. He knelt beside her, careful not to crowd, and smiled warmly. "You did it," he said simply. "He's perfect, and you're incredible." Elena laughed through her tears, gratitude and relief washing over her. She allowed herself a moment to revel in safety, in triumph, and in the knowledge that she had broken free. That night, holding her baby close, Elena felt a profound peace. She was finally in control of her life, and her son would grow up surrounded by love, not fear. Victor sat alone in his small, dimly lit prison cell, the weight of his downfall pressing on him harder than any sentence ever could. The empire he had built, wealth, influence, and the illusion of control, was gone. Business partners abandoned him, clients withdrew contracts, and shareholders dissolved their ties. His luxurious lifestyle, once a symbol of dominance, was reduced to memories of opulence he could no longer touch. Letters and calls went unanswered, allies who once feared and obeyed him now mocked his misfortune in private. On the few occasions he glimpsed the outside world through a small television in the common area, he saw the headlines he couldn't escape. News segments praised Adam, the calm and skilled man who had intervened at the restaurant. The hero waiter was a household name, celebrated across social media, with interviews highlighting his bravery and skill. Stories of Elena's resilience also flooded the airwaves, depicting her as a symbol of courage for survivors of domestic abuse. Every mention stabbed at Victor, a constant reminder that the world now admired those he had tried to destroy. For the first time, he truly understood the consequences of his actions. His arrogance, his obsession with control, and his cruelty had not only cost him his freedom but had also left him completely isolated, powerless, and publicly condemned. There was no influence, no wealth, no excuses strong enough to save him from the ruin he had brought upon himself. Sitting in silence, bruised and defeated, Victor finally realized that he had been his own worst enemy, and that the monster he had believed he could control had consumed him instead. Elena's life gradually transformed into one defined by peace, safety, and purpose. She focused on her baby, embracing each day with renewed strength, and allowing herself the time to heal physically and emotionally from the trauma Victor had inflicted. The apartment, once a new beginning, became a sanctuary filled with warmth and gentle routines. She decorated the home with love, each detail a testament to her autonomy and resilience. Determined to turn her pain into purpose, Elena began attending and later speaking at support groups for women who had suffered abuse. She shared her story with honesty and courage, inspiring others to find their voice and reclaim their lives. She never sought attention or accolades, her goal was simply to help others understand that survival and freedom were possible, even after unimaginable suffering. Adam remained a steady presence in her life, not as a romantic partner, but as a trusted friend and symbol of the night she was given a second chance. Their bond was quiet yet profound, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and the reassurance that someone cared enough to intervene when it mattered most. As Elena held her baby close, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She whispered a message she wanted every survivor to hear: no amount of money can protect a monster, but courage can save a life. Those words embodied everything she had learned: the power of bravery, the importance of self-worth, and the promise of a future built on safety, love, and hope.